D-Lo 404 Boxing. All right, so let's talk about something real quick as it pertains to Josh Taylor, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., Dennis Ugas. We know that Josh Taylor is the undisputed champion at 140 pounds. Has a fight on tap versus Catterall as a defense. And we know Bob has talked about a fight between Teo and Josh Taylor, but Teofimo lost. We know he's now started back talking about Bud Crawford and Josh Taylor fighting, even though he's on record himself saying he don't think Josh Taylor has, I'm paraphrasing, but basically like a snowball's chance in fire, versus Terrence Crawford. But it's a fight he wants to make, allegedly. So, that's something to chew on when you think about, the winner of Errol Spence and Ugas facing Terrence Crawford, should Terrence Crawford still be the WBO champion for undisputed at 147. The thing that I find pretty strange is that, all of a sudden about a month back, you started hearing all this chatter about, Terrence Crawford could have moved up being undisputed at 140. He could have moved up and just challenged Errol Spence Jr. for the IBF championship right away. Could have challenged Keith Thurman, could have challenged this one, that one, but he chose to challenge Jeff Horn. We know Terrence Crawford was chasing that Pacquiao fight still, and Jeff Horn was the guy that dethroned Pacquiao. There stands reason to believe that if you go pick up the belt that Pacquiao dropped and he lost to the guy and he's not avenging that loss, then maybe you can get that fight, but it didn't play out that way. So Terrence Crawford picked up the WBO and hasn't been able to get a unification bout. He's been fighting guys on the other side of the street, so to speak, until he got the Porter fight. As for Errol Spence Jr., we know everything that's happened with him, and now he's back in the saddle, supposedly going to get this bout with Ugas for a big unification bout that I'm in support of. Ugas has been one of the more active top-level welterweight since even before his fight with Sean Porter, in which I felt like he won, but the judges didn't see fit. So we were robbed of an opportunity to see Dennis Ugas versus Errol Spence Jr. at that point for the second time. Because there was a point before that when Dennis Ugas was the IBF mandatory, but that fight didn't happen. Or he was pressing to be the mandatory, or however it went, and it didn't happen. So now we got the fight, so I'm not complaining about the fight. I'm happy to see Dennis Ugas and Errol Spence Jr. for a unification bout. But enter the great Josh Taylor. Since, Bud was supposedly able to come up from 140 and just challenge for whatever belt he wanted to because he was undisputed. Even though he wasn't undisputed when he moved up, he actually had already had to drop the IBF belt because he didn't fight Lipinets so that he could fight the unification. You know what I'm saying? He didn't fight Lipinets, who basically stepped aside so that, what's the guy's name? Blue Meanie, Ndongo was able to fight Crawford because they were pressing Ndongo to fight Lipinets, if I'm not mistaken. I may have it the other way around. It may have been Crawford they were pressing. I think it was Ndongo that was supposed to fight Lipinets. But either way, the winner was supposed to fight Lipinets. That didn't happen. The IBF basically made the belt vacant for Lipinets to fight for it, and Crawford moved up. And like I stated before, there isn't that notion that an undisputed champion can move up and fight any title holder that they want is more of a fallacy than it is actually in anyone's rule book when it comes to the sanctioning bodies. But maybe something's changed. They change the rules all the time. Maybe at that point that's what it was, but I highly doubt it. Otherwise, we'd have heard it long before a couple months ago. We just saw that with Usyk when he moved up. But let's just say that's really the case. Let's just say that these people who are saying that know what they're talking about, and that's really the case. There's no one talking about Josh Taylor potentially moving up to challenge the winner of Errol Spence Jr. and Dennis Ugas. And why is that? If you think about it, isn't he in the same situation Bud was in, other than he's not stripped of one of his titles? So if he's able to successfully defend against Catterall and decides to move up to 147, why are we only talking about Josh Taylor fighting Terrence Crawford? Why are we not talking about Josh Taylor pressing Dennis Ugas or Errol Spence Jr. for a fight? Being that he's undisputed, that he could just challenge for whatever belt And according to figures, that's the bigger fight. Should it be Spence? Let's just say it's Spence. That's the bigger fight financially, according to what everyone says. So you would think that we should be hearing people say, hey man, I hope Josh Taylor don't come up and try to stop the Spence fight from happening. You know, stop Spence from being able to fight with Bud. But all we hear are people talking about him coming up pressing Bud for a fight. And, you know, to me, I just have to wonder why that is. You know, I think I know the answer. And you know, those of you who are listening, I think y'all know the answer too. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to let you ponder that on your own. I'm not even going to put it out there. But the reality is that for me and for my liking, I want to see Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford next should Errol Spence Jr. win. And Terrence Crawford continue to win. Or however, if Crawford even has another fight in the interim. If it's Ugas, I'm all for Ugas versus Crawford. Should Crawford drop his belt, I'm all for whoever, you know, Ugas, you know, if he beats Spence or however, whatever combination. Bottom line, I'm for undisputed next. I want the big fights, don't get me wrong. But if we don't get the big fights and we get undisputed, I'll be satisfied with that, because it's not the fans' fault that the big fights have escaped us, you know. So that's all I got on it. Like I said, I don't believe Josh Taylor can get in the way of stopping anything. I've said that in other videos, even on Bud's end, because Bud just fought in mandatory. Yeah, if Josh Taylor was suddenly the IBF mandatory, you have a whole different conversation. That's a whole nother kettle of fish, because you got Josh Taylor in a mandatory position for the IBF that hasn't been fought in years. You know, there hasn't been an IBF defense, mandatory defense in a long time. So that would be something to be concerned about. But I still don't even see that being the case, and I don't think he's in a position to come up and become the IBF mandatory. Truth be told, I don't think he has a chance in hell of coming up from 140 and suddenly being inserted as the IBF mandatory ahead of the guys that are already in the IBF rankings. I don't see it happening. I've never seen it happen. So until I see something happen, it's hard for me to fathom that's what it's gonna be. But that's all I got on it. D-Lo 404 Boxing. Like, share, comment, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.